Here we go. Whew. It already sounds awesome, and I'm not even at full noise yet. No flap, look at that. Straight up. A little bit of vertical power. Hey, it's Vas here from Aussie RC Airspace, and welcome to my review of the HobbyKing Yak-11 Steadfast. Now, this is a stunning looking plane. I personally really like the color scheme that HobbyKing have gone with this particular version. They did have a twin-seater version before in two different color schemes, but this color scheme is a bit more like a Reno Racer type of look, and I really like it, especially with the sound that it makes. So I've got a little bit to talk about with this video. Even if you have seen my post-maiden flight impressions of this plane, there's a little bit more detail going into this review, so let's get into it. So as always, we're going to start off with the specs, and the Yak-11 has a 1450mm wingspan, which is 57 inches, a length of 1300mm or 51 inches. Flying weight is going to be somewhere around about the 3 kilo mark, but that will depend on the size of your battery and so forth. Propeller is a 16x6. The ESC is a HobbyKing 95 amp brushless ESC with an XT90 connector. The motor is a HobbyKing 5052 550 kV, and you have 6 12 to 19 gram high powered digital metal geared servos. Now, battery suggestions are a minimum of about 5000 milliamps, but there is so much room in this plane that I wouldn't be surprised that some of you may even be running 10,000 milliamp batteries in this, because I do believe that the plane can handle that, and there is plenty of room in there to house those size batteries. Now, for the assembly of the Yak-11, it's pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of tricky places that I'll cover off in this section here for those of you who are perhaps a little bit more inexperienced in building these planes. I did have a little bit of a challenge kind of putting the vertical and horizontal stabilizers in place, because they kind of go in together and they lock into each other. And the way that it sort of goes in, the rudder needs to kind of slide in and go over the actual fuselage, and it's a little bit tricky. You're gonna have to sort of massage it into place a little bit. So if you do find that it's kind of not going to go, it will go in. It's just you have to be a little bit careful, and you'll eventually fit this into place and it'll work. There's a screw on the bottom here that locks the rudder into place. And then there are 2 screws, one on this side and one over here, that actually hold the vertical stab into place, so everything sort of locks in and squishes in together. And then of course you put your control rods into place, you lock that guy into place there as well, and away you go. The main wing only has 4 screws holding it together. There are 4 very long screws, so they're pretty straightforward. You really can't mess those ones up. There's really no problems there putting the main wing on, and the control surfaces for the wing kind of go into a board. So once you actually put the 2 wing halves together, it all gets bolted onto the fuse, and there's a board inside where you plug everything in, and it's really simple. It's very, very easy to do. The other tricky place that I had a little bit of trouble with was this spinner. I couldn't get the spinner to fit over the prop. The openings here for these holes was just too small, and I ended up having to Dremel both of these holes to get it to fit over the spinner. And I had to take quite a bit of plastic off, which I found really odd. Now, I did let HobbyKing know about this. Apparently, some people will fit okay. You might find that you might just need to do a little bit of trimming and it will go in, you'll force it in and it'll work fine. Mine was one of the bad ones, I think, because I had to take quite a bit of plastic off on the leading edge of the prop, and also a little bit at the back here to make sure that these would actually fit over the prop. So I think they might need to revisit that mold and just have a bit of a, a couple of millimeters each side is probably all you need to make sure that it actually goes over the prop. And it's a really unique situation. I've never really had that problem with any of the planes I've had from HobbyKing or otherwise. So yeah, not having the spinner fit on the prop that it's made for, it's kind of an odd one. So aside from that, it's pretty much straightforward. Everything else went together fairly quickly. The little pitot tube here is actually supposed to be magnetized, so that, you know, if you do have a nose over, or if you get caught up somewhere, even if you're, you know, during transport or whatever, you can just pull this out. But the magnet isn't very strong. At least I didn't find it to be. And I actually ended up losing it on one of my landings when I did do a nose over. Now, had that been any other plane, I think probably I would have broken the pitot tube, but it actually just came off. The downside with this is that you can lose it in grass runways. So I was very fortunate to find mine. It took about 15 minutes of searching with me and a friend of mine, and we ended up finding it. And now I've got a little dab of glue on there to make sure it doesn't come off. And that's pretty much it for the assembly. All you got to do after that is just install your desired receiver, and away you go. Now for the center of gravity, I've gone pretty much by the book. I've actually got my center of gravity marked with these little dots just here. So that's where I'm CGing the plane. You may want to go a little bit forward, maybe a little bit back. I actually CG'd it probably a tad further behind this dot. So I kind of had the bulk of my finger just kind of like behind there, and it still flew perfectly fine. So even if you do have a slightly lighter battery, or you want to try a slightly more aft CG, I don't think it's really going to hurt the plane if you go back maybe 5 or 10 mil. There's quite a bit of a leeway there. Now, the CG does say to be 145 to 150 mil, and they actually mark it pretty much from the front edge of where the wing joins the plane. So don't do it from the leading edge here. It's actually from here, and you go back about 145 to 150, which, as I said, I've kind of gone in that panel line just there, and it works perfectly fine for me. I've had no problems with CG at that point. Okay, so for setup, I'll tell you exactly what I've been running and how I've got my radio set up on this guy. Batteries of choice have been the 6200 HD packs. Yes, they are HobbyKing batteries with a HobbyKing plane, but honestly, these are quite a good battery, and they have the weight to really get the CG right on this thing. You can run 5000s. I think I have run 1 or 2 5000s through this. And it does CG okay. It is a little bit lighter, of course. You just have to move the battery a bit further forward. But the 6200s actually work quite well. I've got 4.5 minutes set on my throttle timer that you'll see there. And on average, I'm getting about 5 to 6 minutes, like give or take, depending on how I fly the aircraft. So that's roughly, you know, with a bit of throttle management. If you baby it around, you can probably push a bit longer than that. On a 6200, but you know, 5 minutes thereabouts to 6, that's pretty good. So rates and everything else, let's go into my rates. Actually, before we do that, let's go into servo setup, because I've actually increased my control surfaces to 120%, and my flap has actually got 130% down on the flap. So at full flap is actually coming down quite a fair bit. So we exit out of this and we go to dual rates. With the travel set at 120, my low rates are at 70% and 20 for the ailerons, 85 and 30, and 140 for my high rates. I generally fly this on low to medium rates. I don't know if I've actually gone too far in high rates or flown it too much in high rates. If we go into my elevator, it's pretty much a carbon copy. So 70 and 20 for the elevator, 85 and 30, 140. And that's how I've got mine set up, and it works fine. Do you need a flap mix for your flaps? I believe you do. This is how I've got mine set up. I've got about 4% at stage 1 flaps or takeoff flaps, and I've got 10% at full flap deflection. And that's a little bit of down elevator. So just to keep the plane flying nice and straight, or with a very slight nose down attitude. I actually prefer when I have flaps on any aircraft that the plane actually does dip down slightly. Perhaps not on takeoff flaps because you want the plane to go up, not down. So takeoff flaps you can have a fairly neutral, but on landing flaps, I actually prefer when you deploy landing flaps that the plane just dips down a little bit. And the reason for that is because when I touch down and I relax my elevator, the elevator is actually pushing the plane down. I mainly do that with my jets because it's tricycle landing gear. But on you know, a tail dragger like this, you probably don't want too much down because then when you touch down, you relax your elevator, well, the plane's going to want to kind of nose over a little bit. So just bear that in mind. But yeah, that's essentially my setup, and I'm loving it the way that it is. Now, before I show you the flight footage, I want to go over some of the pros and cons on this plane and give you all a little bit of feedback on how it flies and everything. We are going to start off on some negatives, and then we're going to finish off on some positives because I think that's really important because there are quite a good few positives of this particular aircraft. Now, starting with some of the little nitpicks and some of the negatives here, I think that this spinner is a bit of an issue. I had to trim it quite a bit to get it to fit over the prop. I don't think it's fair for the end user to have to trim a spinner to fit over the stock prop that comes with an aircraft. I think that's something that HobbyKing need to address, and I know I'm not the only one that's had this issue. I've seen a couple of people complain about this online as well. Another thing to take into account is as you're assembling the plane, just pay a little bit of attention to all the little plastic pieces that are glued to the foam. As I was assembling my particular aircraft, this LED cover here on the main wing started to come loose, and I felt that it was about to fall off really, so I took it off, gave it a bit of a clean, and glued it back myself. I could only imagine that if I hadn't noticed that, I would have probably lost it, you know, maybe mid-flight or during transportation or something like that. I think it would have fallen off eventually. So just check all the little covers on the wing tips and everything for your LED lights, just to make sure that that's all bolted in correctly, and anywhere else where there's a bit of gluing with some plastic ornaments or anything like that, just make sure that it's all good and well before you fly the plane. Now, I did have one other mishap. I had a bit of a rough landing and my main gear here kind of came off the wing, and you can see it's a very clean detachment. It really didn't bring any foam with it at all, which is a bit concerning because that means that they're not using a hell of a lot of glue to hold these mains into the wings, and that's something that I've also seen online. I think one or two other people have actually posted up photos or footage of the mains coming off the plane and then showing that there isn't really a lot of glue there. So just again, double check your mains, give them a bit of a wiggle before you go for your maiden flight, and if they feel a bit loose, maybe try and pull them out, put some proper glue in there, and then away you go. Again, this is something that I think HobbyKing need to address from the factory because I think some might have this issue, some may not. The other thing to take into account is really, the magnet here was a little bit weak. I did put a couple of drops of glue to hold that in place, and I really had to kind of massage the tail section to fit into place because it was a bit of a tight squeeze there. But that's really about the only negatives that I can really point out on this plane as far as assembly goes, because there's really not much else. The stickers are actually really good. The plane goes together relatively well, and it doesn't really take that long. But I will put a couple of things on the wish list. Number one is the main wing is very hard to remove once you have this installed. This is a 1450 millimeter wingspan, and it only just fits in my car. I have a Mazda 6 wagon, which looks a bit like this, and I can barely fit this thing in the car. Like, it only just fits. Now, if you have a car that's not as big as that, you're going to have to do one of two things. I think either avoid this aircraft altogether, or if you are really keen on getting it, you're going to have to go through the pain of removing this main wing every time you want to transport it. And that's really a problem because this wing has not been really designed with this assembly in mind. These wings kind of butt together first, and then they screw on with 4 screws underneath the fuselage, and there's like a couple of plugs in there for all your cables and everything, which is supposed to make it somewhat easier rather than having to plug 5 or 6 or however many little servo leads together, it just makes it easy to go with one plug. But it's the entire disassembly process that really makes it a bit of a off-putting, right? Because it's not really designed for that. There's no quick release wings or anything like that. So in the future, I would like to see the wings butt into the fuselage. So rather than going from underneath, they should go from the sides, and that would make transportation so much easier. You know, maybe a quick release system or something like that, and just have those little plugs on the actual fuse and the plug on the wing, and they just plug into each other, and then clip them into place, and away you go. So that would be good if it could be done that way. I know that would require to, you know, redo the entire fuselage. You got to do new molds for everything and all that. It's a big job. It's not a quick fix. I understand that. And again, it's just a wish list. Just me thinking for people that don't have huge cars and really want to get something like this. So that's one thing to take into account. The other thing is, underneath the plane, they give you these little foam exhaust tips, so that you get 2 of them, and you're supposed to glue these in. Now, I didn't glue mine in, as you can see. I took this one off fairly easy. That's because I've installed magnets on mine. I was actually going to do some 3D printed versions of these, but I really I couldn't really work it out how to do it. And so I just put some magnets, and these magnets are a 10 by 10 millimeter by 2 millimeters thick. You just cut out a little bit of foam here, a little bit of foam on the actual plane, and they just pop in. So now I can remove them for transportation, because they do stick out a little bit, and when I transport the plane, I have the gear up, and it's kind of like slide it on the bed of the car at the back. And yeah, these would get ripped out pretty quickly, or at least damaged. So I installed magnets there. So that's something as well that HobbyKing, I think, could look at. Aside from those little nitpicks and those little things, the positives, I think, outweigh the negatives in my opinion, because the plane looks absolutely fantastic. I love this scheme. I think it's a stunning looking scheme. The fuselage has a huge amount of room here for your batteries. So I mean, 5,000 milliamps, you're going to be pushing them pretty far forward, which means you can run much bigger batteries and just slide them back as you go, because you've got like almost 2 feet of battery tray that you can play around with in here, or at least 1.5 feet or something like that. So it's quite a large, like it's 1/2 meter almost, you know. So as you would have seen in my maiden flight, you know, the little video I did a few weeks ago, just in, you know, post-maiden flight thoughts and all that. I absolutely love this plane. The minute it took off the ground, it was just locked in. It sounds fantastic. It looks amazing in the air. It actually lands pretty well. You are going to need to fly it in a little bit. I haven't really flown it too much on calm days. I've been unfortunate and I've always flown it with a little bit of wind. I think I had one flight with calm weather just before the wind picked up, and then after that it's just been windy flights for me the whole way through. So I'm hoping to get a bit more stick time with this plane and get some calmer weather and really enjoy it on some calmer days, because this plane flies absolutely amazing. It looks great. It really has a presence in the air like no other. And yeah, it's just a fantastic aircraft. I mean, it's got its little nitpicks. I mean, I think every aircraft does. I don't think there's anything here that's a massive deal breaker, purely because a lot of this can be overcome quite easily. There's not, you know, you don't have to buy anything to really fix something. It's not like, you know, the ESC's crap, you got to replace it, or the servos are no good, you got to replace them. I've had no issues with servos, no issue with the electronics at all. It's actually been really, really solid. The LEDs are nice and bright. Landing gear's actually got some suspension to it. Just needs some better glue out of the factory. And I think, you know, for those of you who are watching this and are getting this plane, just give the landing gear a bit of a jiggle and see if it needs some extra glue. But you know, at the risk of me repeating myself all over again, I'm going to leave it here. If you're here still at the end of this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button before you go. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new, and enjoy the demo flight. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you all next time.
Motor on. Timer start. Takeoff flaps.
Takeoff flaps on 6S. Wow, she got up real quick.
Gear up.
Just wanted to fly. Oh, so the flaps. Let's go again with flaps up. Go to mid rates. Let's do a big power dive here.
Time remaining 3 minutes.
Let's see if we can set up for an approach here.
Time remaining 2 minutes.
Oh, not the best, but she's down safely.